Welcome back to another camera basics video. Today explaining shutter speed. I'm going to explain what shutter speed is, when and why to change it, and how to use it creatively. So hopefully you've already watched our aperture video. If not, then please give it a watch in the card either here or here, I don't know which side it is. And also don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more photo tip videos, and please give this video a like if you find it helpful. So now that you've subscribed, let's find out about shutter speed. So the first question, what is shutter speed? The fundamentals of photography is light, so by controlling and capturing of the light around you will make an image. So shutter speed, aperture and ISO are three key elements to perfectly expose your image. They make up the exposure triangle. So when we talk about perfect exposure, we mean whether the photo is too bright or too dull. So is the sky blown out and overexposed? So is it bright white when it should be blue? Or is your picture underexposed and darker than it should be? So we've talked in a previous video about how changing aperture can change the light entering your camera. Shutter speed is another way of controlling how much light enters your camera and exposes either your film or your digital camera's sensor. So aperture controls how much light gets through your lens, shutter speed controls how much light hits the sensor, and ISO controls how sensitive your sensor is to light, but we'll cover that in another video. So the next question, how is shutter speed measured? Shutter speed is measured in seconds, usually fractions of a second unless you're doing a long exposure. The time is how long the shutter is open on your camera. So the shutter is what covers your camera's sensor or film in a film camera until you are ready to take a photo. So when the shutter is open, the sensor is exposed and the image is captured. For example, 1/2 means half a second and 1/200 means 2/100ths of a second. So half a second is slower than 2/100ths of a second. So this means that the exposure time is longer for half a second and more light will be captured. 1/200ths of a second is a lot shorter, so less light is captured than half a second. How long you open your shutter speed for, aka the shutter speed you choose, will depend on a number of factors. So I'll speak about when you might use different shutter speeds and how image quality is affected. So a faster shutter speed will capture a crisp image with little blur, but it may limit the amount of light you capture. So this could result in an underexposed image. A slower shutter speed will let in more light, but in some cases this could be too much light, resulting in an overexposed image. It also means that any movement in the scene, for example a moving object or the movement of your own hands, can be captured, which results in blur. A long exposure, aka a longer shutter speed, can be captured to deliberately capture movement in an image. For example, water flowing in a waterfall, but here you'd need to consider using a tripod. You'd also need to consider that you could still overexpose your image. You could change the aperture and try and compensate for this, but a really long exposure of several seconds at nighttime can allow you to capture light trails from cars. You definitely need a tripod for this, no matter how steady your hands are. You might have shot using automatic before, where the camera decides the aperture and shutter speed for you. I like to personally use aperture priority, which means I choose the aperture dependent on the creative look I want to achieve, and I let the camera choose the shutter speed. However, if I was photographing sport or fast moving wildlife, for example, I'd want to make sure my subject was sharp, so I'd choose shutter priority. This is the S or the TV on your camera's mode dial, depending on which brand you use, so your camera does the calculation for you. So this gives me control over the shutter speed. You could shoot in manual and control both aperture and shutter speed, but a lot of the time it's easier to focus on only changing one key element, especially if you're learning. So I'd maybe use 1/500ths of a second for taking photos of cyclists to ensure that they're sharp and crisp, but for a fast moving car I'd probably use 1/1000th of a second. Maybe for a bird in flight I'd consider using even a faster shutter speed of 1/2000th of a second. But what about using a slow shutter speed? Well, for a waterfall you can try 1/8 of a second, just enough to get the flow of the water without overexposing your image. There is a way to use a really long shutter speed without overexposing your image. You can use an ND filter or a neutral density filter, which is the same thing. So this is like putting sunglasses on your lens. It allows you to do a long exposure which captures movement but reduces the light entering your camera, so your image isn't overexposed. Today I will be capturing a few examples of cyclists, of wildlife, and also running water in a waterfall. So today I will need an ND filter. I'm using the ProMaster HDX variable ND filter. This reduces the light coming into your camera between 1.3 and 8 stops, which gives me more control over the light coming into the camera. So when we talk about stops, we're either talking about halving or doubling light in photography. So this filter allows me to immediately remove half the light in the scene right up to almost darkness. It means I can get really creative with long exposures and huge shutter speeds. So we have a variety of ProMaster filters over on our website. I will put the link in the description box below if you want to have a look. So the key points to remember about shutter speed is that shutter speed is measured in seconds. A slow shutter speed can let in more light but might cause blur and you might need a tripod. Too slow of a shutter speed could cause your image to be overexposed, so you may need to change your aperture, but this could compromise your creative look. A faster shutter speed can freeze action, but they might not let in enough light. So you'd have to compensate by adding in light from a flash or changing aperture or ISO. So faster shutter speeds are better if you are shooting handheld to avoid all blur in your photographs. So now shutter speed in video is very different. I won't go too much into detail on shutter speed in video, but if you would like more information on this, then let me know in the comment section below and I will film a completely separate video for you all. So shutter speed in video has the same concept of the effects of a faster and slower shutter speed. However, in video or film, shutter speed becomes more distracting when it's not set to a standard speed. The general rule for cinematic video is that your shutter speed should double your frame rate. For example, if you're filming at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set to 1/48. Or to its closest value, which would be 1/50th of a second. However, like photography, you can challenge this rule for more of a creative influence on your work. But changing the shutter speed, you'll change how your footage will look. So too fast, it can look too jerky. Too slow, it can look too soft. But like I said earlier, if you want me to dive into shutter speed in video, then let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, it's time to wrap up this video. If you found this video helpful, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon to be notified every time that we upload a new video. Also keep an eye out for our next video in the series where we'll be talking about ISO. So until next time, I will see you all very soon.